Hello, everyone. It's Frances Widdowson here. Welcome to the Rational Space Disputations. And for people who are unaware of the format, I have a guest on every once in a while who I find has interesting ideas or I admire. And what happens is that I ask the guest questions for an hour. And then after the hour, the screens are turned and the guest asks me questions for an hour just to make things fair and also to cover off things that maybe got left out in sort of the one-sided questioning. And it's a format that's worked pretty well so far. So in today's episode, I have with me Jim McMurtry. Welcome to the Rational Space Disputations, Jim.
Well, it's great to be here, and I've watched so many of the episodes, so it's exciting that I'm part of it in this way.
Excellent, excellent. And Jim has become well known recently because of his battles as a teacher, and he was fired recently. So we want to hear all about his firing and what caused that, and all the various aspects. But before we start getting into that and some other ideas, like I think that you're a historian, so you probably have a lot of views on the study of history, which is also an area that I'm very interested in. But before we do that, it's probably best for you to tell the audience a little bit about yourself, how you see your position, some things that you think the audience should know.
Thank you. Please don't hesitate to cut me off at any time because I have a lot to say.
Okay.
But I will tailor my remarks as best I can. I think, first of all, there's interest in my case to some extent because my father was a political figure. He was the ambassador for Canada to Great Britain, Attorney General, Solicitor General of Ontario, and after that, the Chief Justice of Ontario, and involved with Trudeau and Bill Davis and others in bringing the Constitution to Canada, our Constitution Act 1982, involved in of course, the Charter is part of it. And I think my father would be happy to be described. He's 90 years old. I speak to him every day and happy to be described as a free rights advocate, someone who believes so fundamentally in the principles and of the law, and including freedom of conscience and expression and so forth, which are things that are being denied to me. So a little bit more about just a little bit about me. There's nothing all that special, except for the fact that I've been around for a long time. So I think when I do speak about what's happening in schools, I do so with a degree of authority. Being long in the tooth. Before going into teaching, I wanted to become like you, Francis. I wanted to become a university professor, but I didn't have the opportunity. So I went with a young family. I needed to get employment, so I became a high school teacher, and I never left. I really sort of found my place there. But before doing that, I did get a PhD from the University of Toronto in the area of educational philosophy. So I certainly know a great deal about the issues that are associated with my presence here today, and to some extent, obviously, with in your life, relating to Indigenous people and their treatment in the past, their education, and so on. So taught for a long time. I was lucky enough to be principal of a junior college in Switzerland for a number of years. Neuchâtel Junior College, and I also was a college instructor for a time. I have been involved in unions. I've been very involved in charitable work, but mostly a teacher and an active coach and director, play director. I always did extracurricular things with students, and it was coaching, it would not be one team a year, it'd be three teams a year and that sort of thing. So I feel that I was very devoted and undeserving of my fate.
Yes, yes. So I guess I'm wondering, I really want to get into your firing, but I don't want to, because once we start on that, we're not going to get off of that. Yeah. So Switzerland, you were in Switzerland for a couple of years?
Yes, 6 years.
6 years.
Yes,
And I assume it was an English speaking school in Switzerland.
that's right. Oddly enough, it's Canadian,
Canadian.
and
Okay.
it was established by an Englishman, but most of the students over the years have come from Canada. So the term that one used to use was finishing school. So an
Okay.
opportunity for people to do their last year of high school and is in Europe, and it's really quite a remarkable little school at the
Mm,
foot of the Jura Mountains, and in between Geneva and Bern, and we took lots of trips all over the place into North
mm,
Africa and Eastern Europe, and of course all over Western Europe. So it was great edification, not only for students, but for me. My whole family is fluent in French. I speak to my grandsons only in French. And I don't think any of that would have happened if we didn't get that exposure. So
mm,
I'm feel very lucky to have gotten that opportunity.
mm.
And I love the Swiss. Obviously their flag's a big plus. That's a joke, anyhow. But they're much about their country that's really, really lovely. And the Swiss are very proud of their country. And
Mm.
that takes me back to my situation. I'm very proud to be Canadian.
Oh yeah.
And I don't understand what's happening in schools that there's such open denigration of what a country represents and how it was in the past. And I think
Mm.
it's really pretty awful, and I don't think many Europeans understand
Yeah.
why Canada would be self-flagellating to this extent,
Yeah.
or at all.
Yeah. So Jim, and this before we get into your particulars, which I find is interesting because I'm this is something that distinguishes me from other people who are talking about Canadian history and so on from this kind of perspective of being a bit upset about how the residential schools are being discussed is I wouldn't describe myself as a proud Canadian. I've never seen myself that way. So why are you a proud Canadian?
Well, I'm a very proud Canadian, but that doesn't mean that I'm not full of criticisms of our country. I
Yeah.
remember when I was younger, I have allergies and people smoking in airplanes. There's so many things that I have lived with in Canada that I found very difficult.
Hmm.
um, and growing up, and that's normal. People living in any country, there are things that aren't perfect, and there are things that I have a hard time with today.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you an example. During COVID, with my grandchildren, there
Hmm.
was no park that they could go to for almost 2 years. There were all
Hmm.
the water fountains were turned off. I didn't really see the advantage of that, of not having providing water for children. So anyhow, there's always things that we can maybe look at and make better. But Canada, relative to the rest of the world, I think it's really important that we always ask ourselves to compare, the question compared to. I
Hmm.
just don't. My travels, I've traveled all over the place.
Yeah.
I just don't. I haven't come across a country that's better than Canada,
Oh yeah.
taken in its entirety. I
Hmm.
think we're so darn lucky with the rule of law that we have here, with the
Hmm.
tolerance, people of different lands and cultures and languages. And I think Canada is just so bequeathed with natural beauty. I love the fact that obviously we're a rich country in many ways. From the healthcare and educational system that that my children were able to experience. I just think we're really very fortunate here. And of course, war is something so distant. But when
Hmm.
I was in Switzerland, which is a country that hasn't been in war, well, they would argue hasn't been in war for almost what, gosh, over 700 years. But the reality is there's a lot of wars going around. Always going around Switzerland. And I was
Yeah.
touched in Switzerland by the war in the Iran-Iraq war. Refugees there, what was happening in Yugoslavia, many people
Yeah.
coming into
Yeah.
Switzerland to escape
Yeah.
that conflict.
Yeah.
And we're very lucky in Canada to be in a peaceful society. So I just
Yeah.
don't, I didn't, I would argue with anybody who would tell me there's a country out there that's better than Canada,
Yeah.
because
But
I
what? But
haven't
why do you feel pride? Like, what is like? Why are you proud? Like there's like can I think there an argument can be made, and I don't know. Like I have no choice really but to be
yeah.
here. Not that, but if I had a choice to go somewhere else, I don't
Where
know
would you
how
go?
I feel about that because I feel comfortable here. and if I went somewhere else, I wouldn't feel comfortable because, well, first of all, unfortunately, and for people listening, I think one of the best gifts that you can give your children is to put them into some kind of immersion program so that they can learn another language at a fundamental level. And I never had that opportunity. So, and because I grew up in British Columbia for most of my life, I never heard other languages being spoken as I was growing up. So for me, trying to learn another language was painful, and it was terrible because I had no ability to kind of think in another language. So it was always a very wooden kind of thing. And if I'd worked really hard at it, and if I'd gone somewhere else and spent some time, I know I could have overcome that. But now it's basically too late. So it's one of the kind of sadnesses that I have, that I never really was able to experience that situation. But that's kind of how I feel about it. But you seem to think that you as an individual, you're tied in some kind of deep way into this idea of Canada. And I'm
Well,
just
I'm
kind of
tied.
interested, I'm kind of intrigued about
Yeah.
why
Well,
that
I'm
would be.
tied, we talk about life experience. So I come from a family of proud Canadians. And so maybe
Me.
better for me to ask them, and they'd be more articulate in response as to why
Yeah,
they're so proud of the country.
yeah.
But I will speak to you to just answer, attempt one more time, um, to why I'm enamored by my country, and that is I talk to my students all the time. Francis, I teach hundreds of students every year,
Yeah.
which is, because I coach and I do theater and I do charitable events, and then you teach
Mhm.
a number of
Yeah.
kids, seven
Yeah.
classes in high school. So
Yeah.
seven times, almost 30 kids or 30 kids. So that's a lot of kids to get to know. And I try and be friendly with kids in the hallway and the kids around anyhow. So I ask them all the time, the ones that are from other places, and I say, "Oh, what do you think of Canada? Do you like it here?" And they say all sorts of things. And some people come here and really struggle
Mm.
because
Yeah.
because of poverty or
Yeah.
language,
Yeah.
cultural, barriers, all sorts of reasons. But I never, really never meet a child who says to me, "Oh, I'd far rather live back where I was from." They
Mm.
almost all say, "Oh, well, no, I want to stay in Canada, and my family wants to stay in Canada."
Yeah.
Because it is better. It's better because of the things I said. We have the rule of law. You can trust the police. You can trust the food that one
Yeah.
eats. I have a dietary
Yeah.
restriction. I've got a disease called celiac sprue.
Mm.
I know what I buy is what it's said to be. I can trust people. I
Mm.
can have my children, walk to school and not worry too much,
But you wouldn't feel
and
that if you're in Europe. You wouldn't feel that, the
well,
rule of
there are
law is in
places
place.
in Europe that are lovely, but other places in Europe that are, much poorer than what we have in Canada. I think Europe is a pretty small, with a wealthy part of Europe, and where they have the things that we do, which is, great public transportation
Mm.
system, great, again, education, hospitals, and all sorts of other things that you have that in probably minority of European countries.
Mm.
You have, of course, in great number in Western Europe. There's so many
Mm.
wonderful countries there, and I don't think I had a hard time arguing with anybody that Canada overall is better than many of the Western European countries. But I would
Yeah.
say we're more blessed because we have all this space and we have a tradition of openness, where some European countries, as you know, are so deeply embedded in ethnic rivalries and linguistic, incompatibilities. There's just so many things, class division. There's so many things that we seem to, Canada, when it was, founded so long ago, or
Mm.
by Europeans coming into the country, it
Yeah.
was a refuge. And I think that's what Canada still remains. The kids in schools, when there are land acknowledgements, and I'm just going to have a chance to say it later, there's land acknowledgements in a classroom. It's really upsetting to a lot of the students because they come to Canada and their families come to Canada because they're wanting to get away from something. They were persecuted or
Yeah.
impoverished or physically threatened,
Yeah.
or or whatever it was,
Yeah.
they wanted something better. People don't move, without any reason. They want to go from something bad to something better. And
Yeah.
that's what Canada represents. So the idea of doing a land acknowledgement, saying how bad we are, and then,
Mm.
the land, is stolen, is going to be given back.
Yeah.
it's just such an assault
So let
on
me just see if I get this straight, Jim. So you're proud of being Canadian because you think that there are these characteristics of Canada that as a whole make it a better place to live than other places. Is that correct?
compared to other
Yeah,
places, and there are not many people who have traveled to more country than I
yeah,
have. I've been
yeah,
lucky in that regard
yeah,
because I lived at a school that was in many ways an international traveling school. So we
yeah.
went all over the place and it was paid for because so I was able to do that. I just have not found a country overall that I take over Canada. And
Mhm.
Switzerland came pretty close, it's even the divisions there between the Germans and the French and the
Mhm.
Romansh and the
Yeah.
Italians
Mhm.
and the class differences and oh my gosh,
As well,
one of
did you feel that you were an outsider there in
yes,
Switzerland?
yeah,
Yeah, and I wonder about
absolutely.
like I do think that that's possibly not that I'm proud because of this, um, but I think it is a point to be made that I think immigrants probably feel that they're more of Canadian society than in other countries because but I would attribute that to that it's because we don't really have a very strong identity like so we don't have a really strongly rooted kind of sense of being Canadian um, and it's interesting to compare of course Canada to the United States because I think the United States is a bit like that as well is that people come from it's kind of known that way as everyone it's kind of a country of immigrants and everyone feels that they can be a part of the United States and they can be a proud American and so on but then you have sort of the problem of the what I consider to be sort of arrogance like the insularity of Americans because they don't really have to worry about being having people push them around and stuff. Whereas Canada is always kind of worrying about the United States, so we don't have that kind of feeling that we're at the top of the pile. So I think that there is something to that, but I don't really find there's very much to Canada. Unlike a place like France, where you can strongly see what France is and what people who are patriotic and so on about France think about France but it doesn't even really occur to me most of the time anything about Canada other than it certainly is not I wouldn't be negative about it because I find that it it has a lot of the characteristics that enable uh, most people to have the things that they need. Now, of course, there's an underclass and this is terrible and so on, but it's not like you see in other countries where there's people really, really, a lot of people and struggling for survival don't have the necessities of what they require and so on, these sorts of things. But Jim, I'm getting, I don't want to stray too far here because I want to hear, I think your audience is going to be interested in you because of your current struggles that you've had. You mentioned that what's happening in schools, there's something happening in the schools, and this presumably is tied up with your case and what's happened. So I was wondering if you could just give the audience a bit of a sense of what has happened to you in terms of your position and being fired. Why were you fired from what was the school you were fired from?
It's called W.J. Mowat in Abbotsford.
What was that again?
The school is called W.J. Mowat Secondary
Okay.
in Abbotsford, and it's a
Okay.
fairly typical high school.
Who is W.J. Mowat?
I have no idea,
Oh, okay. I
and
thought he was
that's
going to be
terrible.
some horrible colonist who, you know,
Well, most
distributed
of the horrible
smallpox
colonists
blankets or something like that.
well, the smallpox blankets that was only attributed to one person, Jeffrey Amherst.
I
He
know.
was an American living. He was a British man living in the United States
I
long
know.
before Canada became a country, and the story is apocryphal.
I know.
So
I
it's
know.
like that relates to
That
my
was an
story.
ironic
That relates
comment.
to my story, Francis. There
Yes.
is so
Okay.
much deceit and dishonesty
Yeah.
and flat out lies, and thank goodness there are people like you and me who are willing, and if we lose our jobs over it, so be it, to
Yeah.
stand up to this senseless moronic mob that's out there that's
Yeah.
telling us there are things that aren't there. There are
Yeah.
no
Yeah. I
graves
know.
in Kamloops.
Yeah.
There are no
Well,
murdering priests
there have been no graves discovered.
thank you.
It's
Outside
open. It's the question is open.
that's right, they were
I think it's
discovered.
highly improbable. It's a highly improbable
Thank you.
hypothesis.
I wouldn't, I don't accept that. I think there's something called, and there's called false testimony, and that relates to the ninth commandment. You
Mm,
can't give false testimony against somebody else. You
mm,
can't say anybody in Kamloops at any time ever murdered 215 children
mm,
without evidence. So
mm,
yes, in the realm of probabilities or
mm,
possibilities,
mm.
all sorts of things could happen. There could be a Martian living in my backyard right now. I can't exclude that. But my
Yep.
point is, there is that's completely false testimony to suggest that there were ever murdered children. And then the number of 215 is even takes it to a completely different dimension in
Mm.
Kamloops. So this is, I feel very strongly about it. And of course, it cost me my
Yes.
livelihood. So at a time
Yes.
where my wife is unable to work because of health reasons, so it's having a pretty powerful effect on me. And yet, I think I've done something that's my own father, as I mentioned earlier in the program, he's
Yep.
proud of me. He's proud of me because he thinks it's absolutely outrageous that we're turning our history upside down and we're perverting it, and we're only seeing it through that
Yep.
one lens of
Yep.
the addled race obsessionist.
Yep.
Uh,
So
and
in your case, Jim, you got a terminate. Did you get a termination letter?
yes,
And is that termination letter public?
I made it public.
Okay. So did they give you a number of counts as to why you were fired?
Yes, but there only is one, but they've added to it.
Oh yeah. So they
And
made up a bunch. So one is true, and the rest is made up.
Well, yeah, it didn't start that way, and maybe I'll just sort of start,
Yeah.
if I may, from the
Yeah.
beginning. But I want to answer that and then go back to the beginning, and just make the point. There's a writer in the National Post named Howard Levitt, who's a lawyer in Toronto,
Yeah. Yeah. I know
and
him.
he's written a couple of pieces, or a number of pieces that I think are quite relevant to me. And one of the things that he said, that in an administrative law, investigations are not used to ferret out the truth. One would have that presumption. They're used to build the employer's case.
Yes.
And there was no, so I was not ever given, and this is procedural unfairness, is just Kafkaesque. I was
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
given witness
Yeah.
statements. I
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
know who my accuser was. I
Mhm.
wasn't able, of course,
Yeah.
able to test my accuser. I was never given an impartial hearing. My employer never spoke to me in almost 4 years. I've never had a conversation with my employer. And with my superintendent and others in senior management who are making these allegations, they've never once wanted to meet with me to discuss things. And some of the things that they've asserted, all to defend my principle, are going to get them in trouble one day. And I think already I've because of the coverage that I've gotten, I would hope they have enough sense to realize that it's wrong to treat teachers in the way that they've treated me, and they picked the wrong person. And the
Yeah.
reason they
Yeah.
picked the wrong person is because I'm in my mid 60s, so
Yeah.
I'm able
Yeah.
to survive without a salary and carry on this. If it were 5 years ago or 35 years ago,
Yeah. Yeah. No.
I wouldn't have been able
So
to, because I was raising a family
yeah.
and you're dealing with a huge mortgage and that sort of thing. So I'm just sort of walked onto it, sort of, as I use this little analogy. I'm sitting and never wanting to, always mad at what's happening in schools for so
Mm.
long.
Yeah.
And starting at the very beginning, teacher, when they knocked out classroom walls or got rid of all the spellers or just took all sorts of wacky ideas in the
Mm.
60s and 70s and
Yeah.
put them into schools in the 80s, and they're still doing that. Some of the ideas.
Yeah.
But I was wanting just to hold on to my job and to teach kids and hopefully having a positive effect on them.
Yeah.
But I ended up one day in class. So it began typically enough with a principal in a school who got a complaint from a student who was
Mm.
unhappy with the mark that she'd received in an assignment. And in the process of his doing an investigation in that, came to the conclusion on his own that some of the things that I was saying, as seen in the written work that I was handing out to students that had produced myself, a tremendous over many years, and I think in many ways quite crystallized work. But he thought that it was in some way it could be seen as offensive to some. And then, of course, people in this world that we live in, they jump from offensive to harmful. There is no connection between the two. We're all offended by all sorts of things, and all the time. I'm offended by my neighbor who's out right now cutting his grass because it's so loud. But that doesn't mean that my neighbors harm me, and I don't harm him when I cut my grass. So
Mm,
they make that illogical leap toward harm.
yeah.
So he thought that he'd nip me in the bud because I'm a liberal teacher who always, felt that it's important to talk about issues from many
Yeah.
different
So just to
directions.
stop you right there, Jim, had you been kind of known as had you been a bit of a thorn in the side of the administration for a while, or there was no history that
No,
existed?
there's no history. So I've been had taught for over 3 decades
Yeah.
as a public school teacher in British Columbia, and never had a disciplinary issue at all.
Yeah.
And frankly, was always hoping to be promoted into administration. But there is that side to me where I do speak out, and that was the black mark against me. And I wasn't
Yeah.
promoted,
Yeah.
even though I know because I won 2 teaching awards
Yeah.
that I know that I was highly regarded by many as a teacher. So I
Yeah.
changed when my wife took sick about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
I moved out to Abbotsford from where I lived and was working in Surrey because, just as what a lot of older people do, and that is to downsize and make life a little bit easier
Yeah. Yeah.
for the years ahead. And so I was new, and the principal didn't know me from Adam, and he thought that I was maybe a little bit too headstrong or too proud or something, because he said some things to me that I thought were fatuous. And I responded always in a polite manner because that's my nature. But
Mm,
I let him know that I didn't agree. And
mm.
one of them was that he wanted what me in my lessons. He wanted me to pass them and my marks to students. He wanted to see all these things.
Oh,
And that's, a lot of teachers learn quickly that that's what you do, that you recognize that it's an abusive relationship because the principal, like any employer, can do all sorts of terrible things to a teacher, not just fire. They can give you a lousy load of
yeah.
courses,
Yeah.
or put you in a distant portable, or just anyhow make your life miserable in all sorts of
Yeah. Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
And if you complain at all, then the administrator doubles down
Yeah.
and makes it even worse. So
Yeah.
it's a rare thing to be a teacher like me that's fired, but it's not uncommon for
Yeah.
teachers who speak out to be punished in many subtle ways.
Yeah. Yeah. So the comment. So you hadn't spoken out. This is the first time you'd spoken out in this kind of way, or you had spoken out before this happened.
I've never in my whole career had a student complain about a mark that
Okay.
I'd given to her or him.
Mhm.
In this
Yeah.
case, it was a her to the principal.
Okay.
This is
Yeah.
what's
Which
happening
is
right now. The
odd
kids are
anyway.
so
Like,
weaponized. Kids are so weaponized
yeah. Yeah.
in schools. There's such a snitch culture and in universities
Yeah. Yeah.
that, that you say anything that's off script, or that makes you in some way different than the next person.
Yeah.
Um, then there's an element of endangerment, and this is
Yeah.
why
So this,
I
in
said
terms of this situation, this student complained to the principal about a mark that you had given this student. Uh, was that resolved? Like, did the principal say, no, that mark is okay, or did he overrule you, or what happened with that?
Well, what happened with that is that the student went to the principal, and then the
Mhm.
mother went to the bat, and she went to bat for her daughter,
The
and it
mother.
was a mother, and it was notorious mother,
Oh God.
and I know that from talking to colleagues, and she came into the school yelling and all that sort of stuff, and the girl's average was 97%, so it was not as though I was a rough marker with her, but her friend had 100%. So that was the root of the problem. Anyhow, the mother went away. In my 2 years teaching at the school,
Yeah.
I only had one parent complaint that I know of, and that was the complaint. But in the meeting with the parent and the student and the
Mhm.
principal,
Mhm.
my relation with the principal was, unfortunately, irreparably damaged. because he saw something in me that he didn't like. And that was simply a proud senior teacher
Yes.
who
Okay, so
didn't need to
that's the
control my
backstory.
younger
That's the
administrator.
backstory. But we want to get to your so there's one reason why you were fired, and that was a comment that you made in class.
Yes.
And what was the comment that you made in class?
Okay, and if I could just to fill in the matter there in between. So the principal, what he did was he reprimanded me because he didn't like what I was saying back to him. And then I
In the
went to my
meeting with the
union.
parent and the student.
Yeah, sure. He didn't like it, so he did a letter of expectation. And then I went to my union and I said, I want this letter of expectation out of my file. And then he, as I used the term doubled down, he made it more difficult for me. And then and so that's really what it was. It was a toxic relation between me and a principal who didn't see me for what I was, which was a very giving teacher who I was always volunteering. I ran a green club. I was coaching teams. I was always being friendly with the kids. I was staying late at the school. I was doing everything I possibly could to give myself fully over to my students in the twilight of my career. He didn't see that way because what he wanted to do, he was new to the school. He just wanted to prove to the parent community this was his first opportunity because they often want to separate somebody from the herd and you know beat that person up, and then everybody in the beat learn method, everybody else that recognizes you don't question the guy. And the superintendent in the district was very much the same way, and he's a golfing buddy with the principal. And so, you know, all of a sudden he got involved and he said that I was a harm to students. Anyhow, just mushroomed from there. So I ended up going over after a year, recognizing that I wasn't in the right school. And I asked because of my because I'm a French immersion teacher, and they needed someone to do that as a teacher on call, as a substitute teacher across the district. That I said, well, could I do that? And so that was the arrangement. And so I left my school, and I became an itinerant teacher. And that only lasted for about 3 weeks. And one day in school, it was the day that it was announced in schools right across Canada about the 215 and child remains
Yeah.
found, taken
Yeah.
out, identified, you know, as young
Yeah.
as three,
Yeah.
and in a mass grave, not graves and not unmarked, but mass graves, singular.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to navigate through this issue with students. I was that day teaching calculus 12 as a substitute teacher. Sometimes you get different assignments, and and the principal said, "Look, everybody, you know, this horrible news has come, and we've got orange shirts and orange this and that." I saw kids with orange face paint. I thought that was politically incorrect. And, you know, armbands, everything. It was like a 2-minute hate out of Orwell's 1984 against white Christians because they're the ones that were responsible for all these murders, the teachers at the school, the Oblate priests and the Sisters of St. Anne. And so here I was, informed in the subjects, and unlike most teachers, because I have a PhD in years of publications on areas that relate to the education of Indigenous people in the past. And so it was unscripted, and it was demanded of me that I enter into this. So I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I've just had a really quiet period. I'm now away from my school. I'm back thinking that my career is on track again because I still had ambitions for myself of going back and becoming a private school headmaster or something. I didn't want to have any problems with anybody. And I was so nervous.
Yeah.
But when a child in the classroom said, and this is very short, but this is the pith, the core of the thing was a student said in class, after I said that someone said something that I thought was really offensive toward Christian churches. And I said that I didn't want to cast aspersions against anyone or anybody, any or institution, including the government. I was just asked by the principal to understand with the students the news and to deal with the kids that were, you know, had to be sort of talked down from a ledge because some were so emotionally indignant and angry and tearful that I worried about their mental state, as one does with, you know, teenagers. And it was just, you know, to all of a sudden see your country is a genocidal state and teachers murdering. And here I was as a teacher, and I was wearing a mask. They didn't know who I was because I was, fair-sized male with a mask on, white-skinned, and they didn't know who I was, and they probably saw me as a church apologist. And I don't see myself as that. I see myself as someone who just wants to get history right.
Mm.
And so what happened is the girl got mad at me and said, "Well, I don't know why you're saying that," or something of the nature, and said, that the priests, what they did is they murdered the students and they tortured them and they held them out in the snow until they died. And
But Jim, just stop there a minute, because I'm still not clear what you actually said, and I missed it there and all the other details. So you said, what did you say to the class?
So I'm almost there.
Oh,
So I said nothing wrong up to that. Nobody, the allegation against me is
yeah,
that I said that I didn't want to cast aspersions against the Catholic Church. That's an allegation, but what I said was I didn't want to cast aspersions against any person or any institution. I just wanted to, in an objective, non-emotive way, because of
yeah,
how the students were feeling, just
yeah,
explain that this was an experiment in education that
yeah, yeah,
obviously was flawed in many ways,
yeah,
I didn't say I didn't think it was murder. I knew it wasn't murder, but I didn't say that. But when the students said the priests murdered the kids and kept or tortured them, kept them by keeping them out in the snow until they died, I made my one bombshell comment, and that ended my career.
yeah.
And I thought about it before saying it. And I guess I'm just not smart enough to have held myself back, although there's another part of me that's proud of what's happened, because I
Mm,
think I've become a spokesperson right across Canada,
yeah,
for teachers' right to speak
yeah,
historical truth in the
yeah,
classroom.
yeah,
And that is, I said that it was my understanding. So I'm showing a little bit of humility, and that ties in what we were saying earlier about Canada is compared to many countries, it has a humility, and that's very attractive to me as well. So I want that in myself. It's my understanding that the children who died at residential schools, who died while enrolled in residential schools, tragically did so from disease, mostly TB.
yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
20 minutes later, maybe half an hour later, I can't remember. There was a short break after we had the discussion. The kids go out for 10 minutes and sort of unwind in the middle of, a tough senior class. They came back a few minutes later. Two male vice principals walked in the classroom and they said, "Get my stuff, pack it up." And I didn't understand. In front of the students, I just don't think it's my place to ever sort of, to show that kind of laundry of authoritarian laundry, dirty laundry from a student. So
Yeah,
I was I was very angry when I didn't understand why I was being let out of my classroom. I didn't know I didn't know it was anything I said. I didn't know why was I parking, what was it something with my car? I had no idea. I had no idea what I had done wrong. And so I get in the hallway and these guys are sullen in their faces. And you have had experiences, and one in particular, Francis, that was very similar to this. So an
yeah,
awful lot of things that you have said and written,
yeah.
believe me, they're
This is having a bit of a. I'm having a little bit of a flashback here.
yeah, no, but the intimidation, the bullying
Yeah,
that these wannabe authoritarians,
yeah,
totalitarians, they're a little huffed up or puffed up in their own importance and their own power,
yeah,
and they were teachers 5 years before. And
yeah,
how does that just change them completely? That they would do that to a senior teacher visiting to the school that day, who did his sincerest best to navigate a difficult issue with kids. So I'm out in the hallway and I grab a little stuff I had, and it was really bothersome in part because I come to school really early as I do and really set up well for the class, following up the instructions from the teacher who was sick that day. And I really was ready to go. I just did everything right.
mm,
And this was happening to me.
yeah,
So I asked them what it was that I had done. I didn't say because I didn't know it was something I said, and they wouldn't answer me. And then I got down to the front of the building and I felt anger kind of surging up. And I turned to them and I said, "This is going to be better for you if you let me talk to the principal first." because I'm not moving from where I am unless that happens. So they saw the seriousness in me, and so they took me to where the principal was, and the principal just said something that was platitudinous, oh well, I'm not really sure what it was or whatever, but I got a complaint from a guidance counselor, said a girl talked to her during the break and said that you had said something. I'm not sure what it was. And the counselor told me, and I told the school district and the school. And I go, why would you tell the school? Why wouldn't you talk to the teacher? Why wouldn't the guidance counselor, my colleague, why wouldn't the teacher? She's bound by ethical principal to speak to me first. So I said that, and the principal, look, it's out of my hands now. And then said something which I thought was kind of interesting. He said, you know what? You probably did nothing wrong. It's just that you touched on a sensitive issue and they didn't know you. And I said, well, yeah, here I am. They don't know me and I'm wearing a mask. I get that. But the principal asked me, you asked me, Mr. Principal, to talk about the news.
Yeah.
And so he made it seem as though my fault was that they didn't know me, so it would have been okay to say what I did
And those
if
two
they had
people,
known me.
sorry, I just don't want to lose the issue here. They were vice principals, the two people who marched you out.
Yes, marched around my classroom and
Okay.
then to the principal's office.
Okay. Well, because you demanded it, you wouldn't have been taken to the principal's office unless you said, "I have to see the principal." They would
Yes,
have just
yes.
said, "Please leave the premises," and
Yeah, and they assumed that I was going to, but and I think you've seen that quality in me since, Francis,
yeah,
that I'm I believe in myself and I'm
yeah,
tough.
yeah, yeah.
And
No,
and,
no,
and
no.
I'm
Most
not
people just
backing
obey
down.
orders.
That's right. But yeah, and if I were in Nazi Germany, I would have been dead in a hurry
Yeah, yeah.
because
No,
I'm not going along with people
yeah,
who put
no,
babies in ovens. So,
yeah,
but
yeah.
sadly, a lot of part of the population does, as you say, follows orders. And so what I found most extraordinary was the consequence of this. So I get in my car and and um, and and I was actually pleased with the principal because he spoke to me. So at least he was,
Okay, okay.
So I'm not in any way saying that the guy was, and I'm not mentioning the name of the school or whatever. It just
Yeah.
he came, it seemed that he was caught up. I didn't know why in the world he would call the school district about something like this without even
Yeah, yeah,
speaking to
yeah.
me until I
Uh,
understood later that I was done in by my principal at my first school, and everybody knew about me because I
okay,
was somebody that
but
would.
but just like in terms of this sequence of events with the two vice principals marching you out, do you know who directed those two vice principals to go and do that?
Well, I can only assume that
But you
it
don't
was.
know. You don't know. It hasn't been
But
stated.
it was my employer, the Abbotsford School District employer,
But
senior
who
manager.
who was like? There's no
So the
person.
principal would have told the vice principals. Vice principals
Okay.
don't do anything
Yeah, yeah. No, I was thinking.
without the
So that
principal.
the principal of that school told his two vice principals to go in there and get this guy out of the classroom.
And he can only do that if I was an immediate harm to students.
Yeah. Well,
And so I was
your
judging
words.
immediate harm to students because I
Your
said
words
that
are harmful, Jeff.
the kids had died from disease. So, but I'm almost done here. So I
Yeah.
get in my car and I go home. I'm talking to the union on the way home, and they say, "Look, there's nothing we can do. You haven't been punished yet." And the union's lovely because the union always goes, "You're not punished if until they actually take away your salary." So I had previously been suspended for 7 months over talking about Paul Bernardo, how he was caught, part of the harm thing, and then they were sending me home again, and I said to my principal said he was looking for things that I had said wrong. And of course, he said nothing wrong about Paul Bernard, how he was caught, and rated nothing to, happen to, any of his victims. So, and it was just something out of the newspaper, and it was just, anyhow, nonsensical. But I was home for 7 months. So when I was being told I was going home again and got a letter the next day confirming that I was on administrative leave and suspended
Mm,
indefinitely because they
mm,
never go for 2 weeks or 2 months or whatever. And
mm.
I know I had just done it for 7 months. I said to my union, I said, I was home for 7 months. It completely ruined my reputation at my school because all sorts of things were circulating about, I must have committed some terrible crime. and now they're doing it again, and I don't believe I've done anything wrong once again. So I go home, and I'm at home for 8 months. I was suspended for 8 months, and for making that one comment.
Yeah. Okay, Jim, but you mentioned something. Okay, so we have the initial part, which was a student complained about a mark, and you were in a meeting with the principal, and he didn't like the way you were comporting yourself and so on, and you got some kind of disciplinary letter because of that. So that was number one. Number two was that you were at this other school, French immersion kind of thing, school, where there was all this stuff breaking about the Kamloops case, and the students were very upset. And you said, first of all, that you didn't want to cast any aspersions on any individuals and so on, which is a mark against you, because of course they are wanting you to cast aspersions because these are obviously murderers and so on and so forth. And then you said that most of the children in the school who died tragically died of disease. But then there was a thing about Paul Bernardo, and saying why Paul Bernardo was caught. Is that correct? That was previous to the residential schools comment.
Yeah, but I already addressed that in a sense. So they've given me 3 investigations.
Okay.
The first investigation began when after the principal didn't like the way I defended myself.
Okay. Yeah.
I didn't want to be under his thumb, and I don't want to be under anybody, who had no clue about how to teach senior history in French, language he didn't even know, and telling me what to do. I just, no, I'm not interested. So he ended up, as I said earlier, they don't use investigations to ferret out the truth. They use them to build their case. So he went looked through all the students' notes, and then he started talking to students in my class. Now I was in hospital with my wife, who was undergoing stem cell surgery for transplant for cancer. So I wasn't even at the school, but he was talking to my students to trying to find something to get me on, to just to show everybody how tough he was with any teacher who was in any way dissenting. And I didn't want to be that person, but that was me. And I thought I was a really nice, polite person. And my previous school and previous principal, was, paid for a trip for me to go to Taiwan, and speak at a conference. And
but Jim, we're not getting to the Paul Bernardo thing here.
No, I am. So I just want to make that point, that I'm not a monster. So I
don't know, Jim. People are saying otherwise.
You talked to my wife, obviously. But so what happens is the principal's trying to build his case against me. I'm away from the school, and he finds out from one kid that I said one day that when they're talking about Bernardo in my classroom, because he was in the news for a parole hearing. I listening to the conversation, and I said to them, I know how he was caught. Do you know how he was caught? Because it's an interesting story. And no, will you tell us? And I said, I can't right now because my lesson plan, but I said I can maybe in a couple of days or whatever. But right now I need, because it was the first day of class with this group, and I really wanted to not go sideways. But 2 days later, I went sideways, and because I related to the course. It was a grade 10 course on career and life education. I thought, well, this is kind of fits in, because
Get to the meat, Jim. Get to the meat.
This is interesting meat. But the person that caught Paul Bernardo was the Scarborough rapist, and so they compared the list one cop had this smart idea to compare the list of persons of interest in a cold case with the current case of this guy in Hamilton, Burlington murder. So I said how he was caught. There was nothing at all about what he did to his victims and so forth. But the principal thought that was enough to show that I was once again not on script, and I was doing what the postmodernists, whatever you want to call these woke Puritans, and what they want to do is they want to clip our speech, and they want to clip our thought, and they want to tell us that, well, you can't say this, you can't say that, it might be that. So I ended up getting suspended on the basis of mentioning how Bernardo was caught. And it's completely false. And the district has settled with me on that one.
Okay.
and they gave me money, so I don't want to talk. I'm not supposed to
Oh,
talk about that.
oh, okay. That's
So the
why it's
first investigation is gone. So a year later, a
yeah.
year later, they're mad at me. So, but I
Um,
wasn't aware of that.
yeah.
I stood up to them, and I stayed true. So a year later, I made the comment about disease, and they
Okay.
suspended me a second time.
Yeah.
And then they suspended me a third time when they
Yeah.
realized they didn't have anything for an 8-month suspension the second time,
Okay.
because it was becoming very aware to
Yeah.
everybody
Okay.
that they, what I said wasn't wrong. It was right of the Truth and Reconciliation
Yeah.
report
Yeah. Yeah.
about kids dying from disease.
Yeah.
So they started a third investigation, even though I
Okay.
hadn't taught for a whole year. And the third investigation was, and this ties in something you said at the very beginning of the episode. The third investigation was still about my disease comment, but they, instead of saying disease, they said that my opinions were inflammatory, were inappropriate, were
But it was the
insensitive.
same
Those three.
same issue though. Like it was
But it
not a
was the
different
same
issue.
issue, but they didn't say it was because I said it wasn't murder or suggested it wasn't murder. They
Hmm.
said the tone of my discussion that day
Oh, okay.
justified an 8-month suspension. And then they added in the third investigation, because they have to build their case, because they didn't
Yeah.
have the
Yeah.
case
Yeah.
against me.
Yeah.
And this is again the tactic. The investigation is, you've said this many times yourself. The investigation is the punishment. And so like travels with my aunt, it's the traveling that's not getting me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, um, but Graham, that beautiful story. So with the third investigation, they introduced two other things, and this is once again why you figure prominently in my life. I'm
Hmm.
not sure. I'm not trying to make you feel uncomfortable, because your case mirrors mine,
Yes.
and because
There's
you
a
were the
lot of
first
similarities.
person. Well, yeah, but when this all began over, almost 4 years ago,
Oh.
you got a phone call from me, and you didn't know
Yes.
who I
Yeah.
was,
Yeah. No. No. Like you,
and
I introduced you to all the network, and
yeah, yeah.
I'm partly responsible for your.
So I'm you're part of my story from beginning to end, and
Yeah.
only in a beautiful way, Francis.
Yeah,
You
no,
know
yeah, but
that.
I'm just a little bit worried
Okay,
about our
so
listeners, and I don't even like, because I find your story, to be honest, a bit confusing, because there's all like, so I want to kind of get a bit of a sense of,
so
because we
here's
don't
the
have very
third
long. We
part.
have 10 minutes to get this so
Okay,
it's clear for
so I'll
people
say
as
my
to
thing.
what
So the
happened.
first one's gone. First investigation is gone because it was settled by the district, because they didn't
Okay,
have anything else. The second one
yeah,
is about the disease. And
okay,
while in the last 2 years, I haven't taught for 2 years, being paid for 2 years,
yeah,
up until a month ago when I was fired. During that time, they realized they didn't have anything on me. So
okay,
they started a third investigation by
okay,
going in and talking to people, and they came up with two other things which are eerily similar to your case.
yeah,
They
yeah,
said that we're going to fire him because they recommended my termination for saying the comment about disease and not murder. So
mm,
I got a letter, and the letter said being investigated, and then the investigator sent me a letter saying termination.
mm,
So the third report was they needed to find something else. So what they're doing is they said that they were going to get me on breaking confidentiality and loyalty to my employer.
mm,
So the employer that has done this to me, a 7-month suspension, an 8-month suspension,
yeah,
and threatening to take away my livelihood, and I only put them off by going on administrative leave. I mean, sorry, on sick leave,
yeah,
and they're doing all this to me.
yeah,
They now are saying that I wasn't showing adequate loyalty and confidentiality to them.
yeah,
Now, I I waited almost 3 years before I went to any media, and the
yeah,
only
yeah,
thing I did was go to
yeah,
the local newspaper
yeah,
with a letter to the editor that was never published. But
yeah,
that was enough for them to say that I broke confidentiality.
yeah,
And they
yeah.
said that my loyalty in the report, in this third investigation, that my loyalty is to the Catholic Church and not to them. Now, I'm not Catholic, just to show
Mm.
you how stupid this whole thing is.
Yeah.
But my loyalty is only to what is academically right, which is students
Mm.
should be told the truth, which is, showing a fair picture of historical facts, however one wants to arrange them. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so the third investigation said that came to the same conclusion as the second investigation,
Yeah.
which the disciplinary meeting had been put off by me because I went on sick leave, that I was to be fired. So in the end, they fired me for saying that being insensitive that day in the classroom, by not saying it was murder, and by not being loyal and adequately confidential with my employer. And I certainly haven't been loyal and confidential
No.
in the last month, because the couple of days before my um and this is coming kind of a compelling story. A couple of days before they were going to fire me, maybe it was 4 days, I
Hmm.
went on a family trip, and my son was there, and he took me aside, and he and my children are lawyers, and he's a lawyer, and he said to me, "You're doing this wrong." And I said, "What do you mean I'm doing it wrong?" And he said, "You got to go on Twitter." And he's a imposing guy.
Uh,
He's 6'5", 250 or 60 pounds. So he's
Twitter.
saying, and he just
Uh,
grabbed my phone and he
yeah,
sat me down and
yeah,
he
yeah,
showed me
yeah,
how to go
yeah, yeah.
Twitter.
No.
And I turned the 4 days that were going to be hell, waiting for my execution,
Yeah, no, no.
turned it around with my son's wonderful idea of, this is how you go in the offense deck. Because I was going in the offense. I
Yeah,
decided,
yeah,
I
no.
said to him, but I was doing it quiet ways and I
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
doing
yeah,
it
yeah.
effectively.
No.
He said, go on Twitter and the whole world will know. And since, as you know, I've been, interviewed by Americans, I've been in
Yeah,
communication from people all over the world.
yeah,
My
yeah,
story, like yours, has
yeah,
broken
yeah,
into the
yeah,
public consciousness.
yeah.
And so thank you, son.
Yes. Okay, Jim, let's have a recap here so that people can figure this one out, which is okay. First of all, there was the sit down with the principal and the parent about the complaint about the grade, and you received some kind of letter, some kind of disciplinary warning from the principal. I assume that was part of your progressive disciplinary kind of situation. And then you had another matter that was resolved, and everyone that didn't count against you, that matter. And then you had the comment about how it was disease, that not to cast aspersions, and it wasn't disease. And they suspended you for that. But when they found out that that was not enough to justify the length of the suspension that you had, they went and did more investigations and so on to dig up more stuff. And in the meantime, at some point, you went to the media about this, and then they said, "Okay, you have broken confidentiality, and you are not loyal to your school." Is that correct? Is that your case?
Yeah, it's not perfect. The only thing that's not perfect is that I broke confidentiality and they wanted to fire me
Yeah,
over a year ago. So
yeah,
long before I actually went to the media,
yeah,
they said I broke confidentiality by writing one letter to the editor that was unpublished, and by writing to trustees and to the Minister of Education. So I did break confidentiality and I
yeah,
did break
yeah,
loyalty in that sense, but I feel it was in the public interest.
yeah, yeah.
If
You're a
my
whistleblower.
employer
Whistleblower.
was lying about history to
Yeah,
students and using kids as young as 5 and
yeah,
6
yeah,
for their to create their this proselytization project of converting little kids into woke robots, where they go around saying how terrible Canada
yeah.
is, how racist it is, and how they shouldn't feel, and how shouldn't even accept basic knowledge like 2 plus 2 is 5, and boys are boys and girls are girls.
um, and so your situation, your case is going to arbitration. Is that correct?
Yes. So my union said to me that
Yeah.
they weren't sure that they were going to be able to take my case to arbitration. And
Okay.
I said to my union on a
Yeah.
number of occasions very clearly, that's
Yeah.
okay, because then I'll sue you.
Yeah.
So there's nothing that's going to make me move an inch. I'm
Yeah.
like
No.
Frances
No.
Widdowson.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the union, right after I was fired, which was a month ago, 3 weeks ago, um, um, that and oh a month I guess a month ago now, what I did. So I just got passed a note by my wife. She wanted to say to you, I never broke confidential in the sense that I never agreed to be muzzled. So I never have done anything
Yeah.
wrong.
You didn't sign a
I have a
confidentiality agreement.
Democrat. I live in Canada. I have a democratic right to say when they're using manipulating children
Yeah.
and abusing history and using it as a tool to defame white children in the classroom. or to groom them or whatever sort of, nefarious thing they're up to, then I have a right to. So I've done absolutely nothing wrong.
Yeah.
So that's where I am.
So when is your case going to arbitration, Jim?
Sorry about that. And I blame my wife for that digression,
Well,
but I appreciate her passing me that note.
yeah, no,
So
that's true.
as soon as I was fired, my union, my local has been very supportive, but the
Okay.
provincial body is very woke, like
Yeah.
all
Oh,
institutions
yeah.
across Canada.
Yeah.
They're all infected with this virus.
Yeah.
But I learned almost within a day or so after I was fired that the BCTF, that the provincial union, is taking my case, is supporting me going to arbitration. So thank goodness that I spoke out and took the
Oh, yeah.
stance that it,
Oh, yeah.
because
No, people take notes. Very
I think
important.
people realize that cancel culture is a little dog, as Dave Rubin said, with a little dog with a big bark. You stand up to it, and if you're principled and you know you're right,
Yeah.
then everybody is going to fall, and everyone's going to collapse in front of you, and that's what's going to happen to me right to the end. I'm absolutely convinced of that,
Yeah.
because and I only became convinced of it because of people like you, who are
Yeah.
historians, who confirmed in my own knowledge that I never said anything to my students that was historically inaccurate.
Yeah.
Because if I had said anything that was inaccurate, then I would, of course, say that I was wrong.
Yeah. So do you have a date for your arbitration?
No, I don't have any date. And my union
Okay.
said it could be soon if
Yeah.
they get nervous and want to settle with me,
Yeah.
because there's going to be more
Don't
negative
settle.
publicity.
Don't settle.
And I'll talk to you before. I believe me, I'll be contacting you before I do anything. But
Yeah.
but I think what they're going to do is they're going to continue to do what they've done all along, which is to be as brutal as they possibly can
Yeah.
with one of their employees who
Yeah.
has the temerity to stand up to
Yeah.
their dishonesty and again, indoctrination of school children.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think they're going to wait and try and starve me out because I have no pay
I know. I know. That's what
for
they
a
do.
year or two,
They'll
and they've
do
done
that.
that with you, and they're doing that with the nurse Amy Ham with
Yeah.
meeting after meeting, always into the future.
Yeah.
So they're going to think they can break me, but it's not going to happen because I'm just too determined,
Don't settle.
and
Push it
and
to
I'm
the
going to
end.
and
And
I'm
then
going to
if it isn't successful, appeal. So you
oh
can go higher.
yeah,
Because the
because I
arbitration, yeah, well, anyway, we're getting into my area here. So anyway, Jim, I know this is hard to believe, but we reached the hour point here, and I don't want to go over too long. And so I'm gonna turn it over to you, and now you can ask me questions.
okay, and I would like to, in some ways, some of these questions obviously reflect my headspace right now,
Yeah,
and that is when you were recently at the University of Lethbridge
yeah,
and you were walking into a public space to deliver what you had the right to do as a citizen, and certainly as someone who's highly knowledgeable in your area,
hmm
to speak to people about something that was of interest to many people at the university. Did you feel that that was acceptable, that you were made, that you're put in a situation that was that threatening? When I watched the video clip, I
yeah,
felt that the university was wrong to ever have allowed, particularly a female professor, visiting professor, to be put in that situation. Because they talk about safe spaces for kids.
yeah. But
Overall,
like,
this idea might hurt them. But
yeah,
you
I
were
kind
that
of was
was
fine.
you were
Like
not safe.
my own impression of this, like it's interesting, like because people have said that to me, like what, but I didn't find it was a threatening situation at all. Like was my own kind of reaction. Um, I was kind of amazed that my heart wasn't pounding. Like if this had happened a few years ago, I would have been like, oh, I would have been rattled. I would have been quite rattled. But I didn't, I was just kind of, I was almost sort of, this is what I sort of found it a bit absurd that it was happening. And I was almost slightly amused by it. And I was just like, it was like I was distance. I had a lot of, it was like I was kind of viewing it from afar. And I've heard people have these experiences where they don't even really see themselves. They kind of almost are outside of themselves looking down on it. So so I didn't find it to be a threatening situation. I was trying to move, like I was going to listen for a while, and I was just kind of, clapping and sort of saying, okay, well, they're going to have a bit of a performance. And then I realized that this wasn't going to end and I wasn't going to be able to talk. So that led me to try to move through the crowd. And then the one thing that bothered me was some, spoiled brats were trying to block me. Like they were trying to physically block me. And I said, don't block me. And I pushed through them. And then they kind of pretended like I was assaulting them or something like that. Like, so it was kind of this cry bully. Like this was kind of a cry bully kind of tactic that you are the one who's being aggressive. And yet you pretend that somehow when someone, sort of kind of reacts, then you wounded me and all these kinds of things. So I was moving through and I talked to this guy, this Indigenous guy, which is actually a very good conversation. And that was very interesting. And then I thought, well, it would be, I'm just talking to one person here and I should really move and try to, talk to an audience because that's why I'm there. So that's what led me to lead that. And then this Indigenous woman started screaming at me that I was a fucking bitch. And I'd stolen her land, and this is kind of an interesting thing too, that there's this underlying hatred that some Indigenous people have because of this whole neo-tribal renterist kind of framework where their land has been stolen and so on, and it's kind of seeing history in this very this kind of thing of the black kind of white people, like the evil white people came and stole everything and so on. We lived in a paradise. Life was an Eden, and then the white people came and life is a hell. This kind of thing, which is encouraged by these woke academics and journalists and so on. And then I stood up on a riser to try to talk, and then I was shouted down. And then security came up to me at that point. And they said, she should consider leaving now. And they were alarmed. They were a bit alarmed. And I was kind of going, oh, it's okay. Like, I wasn't worried, but I thought, I'm not going to be able to talk here anyway. This is not going to happen. And the security detail, I don't want to kind of put the security into a difficult position because they're trying to maintain order, and there could be a stampede or something like that, I guess. But I thought these people were theatrical. Like that's what kind of that was my impression, is it was not real. Like they weren't sincere in their opposition. Well, the woman who was angry at me, the Indigenous woman who was angry at me, who was yelling at me, she was sincere because she had this pent up hatred of quote unquote white people who had stolen her land. So she was sincere. So she was really the only sincere person, and the Indigenous guy who was talking to me. And he actually had some very good questions that he was asking me. So I was very appreciative of that. And I believe one media outlet had a recording of some of that. So that was actually very fruitful, that discussion. So it was all, but I remember there's this one picture, which I think James Pugh has put on his Substack, where there's this blonde Barbie type with this sign saying, no room for hate or something, or racism is not hate speech, with her mouth wide open. And I'm got my speech, and I'm going, like, I got this sort of look, which is sort of how that was it in a nutshell. This look of, this is crazy. Like what, like, I am not, first of all, I'm not what they think I am at all. I've got something important to say here. And they don't care. Like they don't even, they're proud of the fact that they don't even know what I'm talking about. This is just wokeism on steroids here. And this is just nuts. And the fact that this is being encouraged by the president of this university and the union, and this is something I want to get into a bit with the unions, because this is, for me, I think the unions are a bigger problem even than the administration right now. The union, the University of Lethbridge Faculty Association put out this horrible statement about my so-called hurtful words and how this is terrible and how there are supports for people. And like, this is a union that is supposedly representing academic freedom and open inquiry. This is where they have descended to. It is shocking. So anyway, so the whole thing was this huge theatrical event, which I think is going to be very important in the long run because it was so over the top. You have to be a completely indoctrinated and zapped with the postmodernist venom in your brain to think that was okay. Like, no one can really think that that was okay and be normal. If you think that was okay, there's something wrong with you.
Exactly. So my interpretation is a little different because I wasn't you and I was watching. And I saw your head when you were going through the crowd, I saw your head go down. So I wasn't, it wasn't the Francis that I think you were in some danger. And it didn't turn out that way. But but I remember watching when the Taliban, maybe it was the year after the Taliban rule fell in Afghanistan, there was a women's protest, and this is the first time in Afghan history. And the women were walking, and it was a small motley group of women, different sizes and different apparel, and women have different types of signs. They came together and they were just talking about women's rights. And a number of the men that were who would come out and were watching started to throw rocks at them. And of course, they kill women in that way, to stoning to death for breaking religious law. So they started doing that, and then the women started to shriek, cry, and ran off. So the protests fully dispersed into nothing. So the rock throwers had won. And I thought to myself in watching that, and the connection I'll draw in a second to your case, was that that wouldn't happen in Canada. That most Canadian men would pick up a rock very quickly and throw it at the men throwing the rocks.
Yeah.
I've lived long enough in this country to know that that's how Canadian men react. They protect vulnerable people. They protect the Canadian women, and they certainly protect anyone who's innocent against an aggressor. So my next question for you is, it would have been hard for me to have been there because I wouldn't have stood and watched what happened to you. I wouldn't. It's not in my character. So who did it? Why did no one stand with you?
Oh, there
You
were
were
people
up.
standing with me. So
Okay.
so
But you were
Albert
up in the riser by
Albert
yourself.
was with me. Albert was with me. So he never he was, and I didn't know this because I was like, sir, actually I was looking for him. Albert Howard, my co-author and partner. He was standing. He was He was actually
And I
going to
heard him
protect
speak.
me.
I know he was there because I heard his powerful voice, and I know
Yeah, no.
and
So
an
he
intelligent.
was he was watching. So I
Yeah,
didn't
no,
know
I
this
could.
because
I know his
I was
presence,
looking for
but
him because it was a huge crowd and I couldn't see him. So I was looking because I wanted him to come with me and I couldn't find him. And also Paul Viminitz was there and I couldn't find him. So it was big. It was very confused. Um, Anthony Hall was there, which is another interesting case in its own right, who was a professor who was fired from the University of Lethbridge, or he suspended. He had a big, huge, that's another very important academic freedom case in Canada. So Anthony Hall, and there was a woman there who was going free speech as well. I don't know who she was. And another woman, like there were people on my side who were there, but they were kind of watching and seeing, like, because I guess they were sort of going, is this just a theatrical thing or is it going to then turn and become a violent kind of thing? Like, so they were waiting to see what was going to happen, but they were there to protect me. So I wasn't, yeah. So
very
that was,
happy to hear.
there were people there. It was just, but it was like, my own view is, let people blow off some steam. Like, they want to get this out of their system. The president has created an environment whereby these people feel entitled to do this. So you can't blame them. See, this is the thing, is that people want to blame the students. Don't blame the students. Blame the professors. And I've got about 10 who I have documented their antics and blame the president. The buck stops with him. And, all the other administrators. There's another woman, Leslie Lavers, I think her name is. She's the vice president of student affairs. She is unbelievable. She wrote a piece in the Lethbridge Herald or something about how, denying you shouldn't whitewash genocide. And she used the Kamloops case, the 215 murdered children in Kamloops, as evidence for her arguments. Anyway, she's another one. So these administrators at the University of Lethbridge, they are not competent to run an academic institution, and they have given terrible signals to the students, which is not going to be easily rectified at this point. So we have a lot of smoking guns at Lethbridge, and this institution will be held to account. And it's all documented, and they have no defense at all. It's ridiculous. People can disagree with me and say that I'm wrong and so on, and we can have an argument about it. But all this nonsense about residential school denialism and hate speech and hurt, and this is nonsense, and people got to stand up against this. And the time is now. You mentioned Afghanistan. We've mentioned Nazi Germany. An example. Nazi Germany was not always Nazi Germany. What was Nazi Germany like in the precursor period? We're not being disappeared here in Canada. We're being fired from our jobs, which is a bad punishment, especially, as you said, for people who are raising a family and have a life to live. But do we want to have people being disappeared in the middle of the night? And that's where we're going. And people who are not taking this seriously need to listen and start to fight back against it before it's too late.
I would say, Frances, it's not where we're going. It's where we are. And I think what happened to you, yeah, what I would say, we're not there, and it's not a crystal knock.
But we're heading there.
It's a question to agree, but I think we're already there, because what happened to you was the administrators at that university and a lot of professors, not probably more than the 10 you mentioned, and a lot of the students were fomenting violence, or the potential for violence, by their conduct, and by
no, you got to be careful. How are they doing that?
Because they are preventing you from expressing yourself, and that can become a tinderbox, as we know, and I've seen that.
But look, they were just loud, so they were just being louder than me. So, but I could have just yelled at the top of my lungs and just had a competition of yelling. So the real problem at the University of Lethbridge, which we're currently pursuing, is that Paul Bernardo, who was the person who invited me, who's a board member for the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship. And that's the other thing, people who are listening to this. If you're not a member of the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship, become a member right now. It's $25 a year. It's nothing, but that's the organization which is defending professors, and to some extent teachers. It's becoming a wider organization. Anyway, Paul Bernardo, he invited me. The provost canceled his talk. He has an email from the provost canceling his talk, canceling my talk. So he invited me to give a talk on a matter of public concern at the University of Lethbridge, academic concern. Room was booked for that talk to take place. The provost canceled that talk. That was a violation of Paul Bernardo's academic freedom. So that's the major issue. In terms of me yelling at other people and so on, it's true that my freedom of expression rights were violated to some extent, and the rights of people to hear me talk were violated in that context. But the more important one was it's a bit of a stretch though, that kind of brouhaha that happened, because it's a public space and people can yell in a public space and I can yell, but the big thing is the cancellation of the room that was booked. That's the issue.
Okay, but to me,
That's the big
for
issue.
me, in my own interpretation, I'm going to hold to it. That one woman who was walking and yelling was provocative. And I think people like that often meet a response from somebody on the other side who's
Yeah,
equally
but you can't,
provocative.
I don't think that's a good way to look at it. So, people can vent, they can swear at you, they can do whatever. The people who blocked me, now they were bordering on, that was starting to get physical. And one woman said she saw someone try to trip me. I didn't notice that, but the blocking, people can't impede your movement, right?
But I saw physical jostling. So anyway, I was going to move to the next point here.
Yeah.
So when you talk, Francis, and others do, and I mentioned earlier about land acknowledgements, which are daily at my school, and they brought in all sorts of things that weren't just about, here who was here first. It was about continuing injustice, justice, and genocide in the past and present. It was just so incredibly over the top. Let's just look for a second, and we haven't had this discussion. So let's say Canadians do decide to give the land back. Let's just say, because that's what a lot of activists are asking for right now, and not
Yeah.
just Indigenous. I think
Yeah.
in many ways, Indigenous are being used by self-hating, non-Indigenous Canadians. But if the land is given back, we know that a lot of people might go somewhere else and accept that, and out of the goodness of their heart say, look, I'm going to give up everything I own, and I'm going to go live out. But most Canadians, or many Canadians like me, are going to say, over my dead body, am I going to give up my house? I'm going to give up anything. And I'm long rooted in this country over hundreds of years, and I have nowhere to go to, because I'm Canadian, I'm nothing else. And even though I lived in Switzerland for a number of years, I can't go back to live in Switzerland because I have no rights to live in Switzerland. So I only have a right to exist here in Canada. So my point is, when people say things like, well, we'll stolen land and we'll give it back, that too is not only provocative, but evocative of violence. It's going to bring about societal, I think, civil war. I think this is not just an issue of an academic nature. What we should do in the future with regard to treating Indigenous people and their rights and so forth. I think we have to be very careful as Canadians, that we don't divide ourselves so greatly that we're going to be looking at each other, as it happened already in Canada in 1970. We lived through that, both of us. And my wife's family, I'm here in British Columbia because the woman I married's family was run out of Quebec because her father was an air traffic controller and he had an English last name, spoke perfect French. They got rid of every name that was not French out of anyhow, and his whole union, and sent them out of Quebec. And they moved here. And then my wife, after she married me, she said, oh, I'd like to reunite with my family. So I'm out here because people are being chased out of Quebec, in many ways, violently. My wife has memories of a kid and being in Quebec, of her parents saying, don't mail anything at the post office box because you could lose your arm, because people are putting bombs there. So the potential for violence in any society is always there if you create deep hatred between different groups. And I think what we're doing with Indigenous people is, I think we're creating, you've already alluded to it, I think we're creating great hatred in them for us. And I think that's wrong. And I think we're getting the history wrong, as just and part others are getting the history wrong, and they're doing it naively, with
No,
tremendous
they think it's a good thing. They think that it's helping somehow, when it's actually making they talk about right. Like, it's ironic, the language that's truth and reconciliation, it's the opposite. It is fabrications and divisiveness. Like we are more have more antagonism now amongst Indigenous and non-Indigenous people than we've ever had, because of this attempt by the Aboriginal industry, because that's what's behind it, to give people the impression that it was, and also to some extent, this whole critical race theory kind of way of analyzing things, which is it's white supremacy that's at the root of everything. So it's really whiteness and white people doing this to, well, indigenous or black people and so on. When this is the problem with this wokeism framework, is that it's looking at these kinds of immutable characteristics as being the root of the oppression, when, you know, in my own view, it's class that is the issue here, right? It is economic circumstances which are then being shaped in terms of ethnicity in various ways. So in the case of indigenous people, because of capitalism and the need to bring land into capitalist development, indigenous people were displaced from their lands. And because they were indigenous, they've suffered this economic circumstances with an ethnic kind of facing kind of thing. But it's really an economic situation that impacted them as an ethnicity more than other people. But there were many other people historically who were white, who were pushed off their lands as well. If you go and look at the history of what is now the United Kingdom, that was all the Scottish people, you know, pushed off their lands, and all the commons were taken over by, you know, sheep farming, and like this was economic, these circumstances, and the color of one's skin or the heritage that one has is irrelevant. And that is a very important thing to keep in mind, because it stops people from looking at one another on a racial basis and allows people to look at one another on a class basis. And this is one of the biggest problems, in my view, of what's happening with this kind of intersectionalism and wokeism, and identity politics has become totalitarian, all these things. This understanding, and this is what is causing the racial hatred, is because indigenous people think that it's white people it's because they're white that they did it. Well, it's not because they're white. It was because certain people were in positions of economic power and used the state and various kinds of coercive instruments to increase their economic, their economic circumstances at the expense of others. And if we could start to talk more about that, and less about, you know, someone wore a headdress at a folk festival. Like, people are wearing headdresses at folk festivals. It's like, well, why do you care? Like who cares? Like this is not a big issue. You know, people are doing paintings in the style of the woodland style of Norval Morrisseau, and Vivian Timmons from Memorial, like, she said that she had a grandparent or an ancestor who was indigenous, and like this is now like, are you saying that that's why she's the president of Memorial, is because she has an indigenous ancestor of some kind? Like, no wonder Memorial is in such a terrible state if that's how they're selecting their presidents. All this stupid stuff is going on, and we're losing sight of the important stuff.
Yeah, Francis, let me just the point here. I think it's a mass distraction. You know, as you have written and said many times, it doesn't help Indigenous people. It doesn't help them get potable water, or deal with suicide or drug and alcohol addiction, or lack of employment. You know, living on a distant reserve. Anyhow, so the whole thing is stupid. It's unproductive. It does nothing for Indigenous people.
Yeah.
The point that interests me the most is coming back to the race thing. I couldn't care less about what skin color I am. I just would like to have the same rights and responsibilities as other Canadians because I think that's what
Yeah.
fairness dictates. My wife's grandmother lost her parents when she was a baby. She was an orphan. She was taken into by Catholic nuns and she was raised. She was judged not capable enough to have an education. So my wife's own grandmother wasn't given an education. When I met her, she could only sign her name with an X in later age. So this idea that we were so terrible to Indigenous people by providing them with an education. I'm
Mm.
not saying again, it was, as an education should have been. And I'm simply saying the idea that this is genocidal and that every parliamentarian in Canada that was in the House of Commons October 27th agreed with that motion. And then now, of course, with Leah Gazin and others of her ilk wanting to label us as denialists. But my point about this business about white thing, not only is it ridiculous, I worked at a school for many years where most of the kids were brown and wealthy, and the white kids that were at the school lived in the basement suites of those houses. So that the idea that, and then the teacher writing white privilege on the board to
Mm.
kids that lived in trailer parks or basement suites with family members all squeezed together, just the absurdity of it all. But
Mm.
to me, as the teacher, and I know you two are teaching, you're teaching at the university level.
Yeah.
But what I hope that people at your level recognize that to me, it's not academic as much as it is it's so human, this issue, in the sense that if you were to work with a group of kids who are 18 or 25 or 45, whatever age your students are, and have conversations like this, I really think at that age people are able to deal with conversations or with ideas or information, data, whatever that they might be uncomfortable with anyhow. But what they're doing in the school system is they're taking 5-year-olds or 10-year-olds and they're telling them because they have white skin that they're privileged and oppressive and aggressive and all these other things, and there's something wrong with them.
Yeah.
And so these ideas are not just something that they're not just bad ideas in the context of the university and in the context of a society. And you have me as your guest today. This is so fundamental that anyone watching walks away with realizing that this is most essentially wrong for children, to
Mm.
take children and to blame them, to collectively punish them
Mm.
on the basis of skin color or the basis of who their ancestors were.
Yeah.
I just, we don't do that in Canada. Collective punishment was something that thankfully was never part of the Canadian project. And
Mm.
that people in recent years are bringing that into Canada and thinking that's acceptable and to do it to the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so in universities is bad. Francis, what happens with in your universities with the woke professors is over this bad. But it's so much worse in elementary school or primary school because these are kids who
Yeah.
can't defend themselves, who can't walk out and go, well,
Yeah.
my professor's full of whatever. They can't do that. They're gullible and they're manipulative and manipulable. And so I just think at whatever level we're talking about, the whole woke thing has to be completely disassembled because it's just such a terrible thing for society.
Yeah.
And I have another question for you.
Yeah.
You said about your suggestion to me was, don't settle and to go to arbitration.
Yeah.
So what I presume that's the advice that you're following for yourself.
I
Are
am.
you planning to go? So what you're hoping for is a legal ruling that's going to be a precedent that's power for others in Canada. Is that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I won't settle on this. So I might the demand is to be reinstated. Actually, I had 3 demands. One is that I should get because before I got fired, my demand was a 6-month sabbatical to make up for because I was on sabbatical when I was put through all these investigations and everything. So that meant that I had 6 months of my sabbatical that I couldn't do my academic work that I was working on. So I wanted that. And anyway, so I got fired instead of they in fact used it against me. They said that the fact that I was demanding a 6-month sabbatical showed that I had no appreciation for the terrible things that I've done. It's like, well, I've done nothing wrong, so like you're not going to get anything like that out of me. So, and then you get, that's one of the kind of the reasons that they give as to why you can't continue to be employed. But now I have three demands. So probably at least 6 months sabbatical, but it should probably be more since I've had to now spend three, it'll be now if the case is settled in June 2024, not settled, but the decision comes down, that will mean the whole thing started in terms of the grievances going forward in January 2021. So that will be 3.5 years that I've been at this now, in the decision. So I should get some sabbatical to deal with that, but I've had to do. So reinstatement, a couple of years sabbatical, and a statement from Mount Royal that I never harassed or discriminated against anyone, because I didn't. This is all invented stuff. And if they're going to use their definition of harassment they used on me, anyone who's on social media who's a professor is a harasser, because they're demeaning the ideas of others, which is how they see my, satire, is that, because I am criticizing wokeism, this is demeaning of the perspectives that others value. And it's like, no, that's not harassment. So anyway, so those are my three demands. Mount Royal obviously doesn't want any of those to happen. So it's going to depend upon the arbitrator. And this, of course, is a real difficulty in labor relations matters, because I just saw this case, which I put on Facebook, which is absolutely shocking. Alan Ponak is the arbitrator. Anyway, there's a woman who was working for Justice Alberta, and this is a huge issue now in all facets of life, which is words that you are not allowed to use or mention anymore. So it's just decided that some words, doesn't matter what context it is, even if you're trying to be clear in your communication, or you're using it like Pierre Valliere did, which is as a rhetorical device, which is very important for an author to be able to use rhetoric and to be able to use emotions. So it doesn't matter your reasons for using or mentioning a word, that's not allowed. And it's just decided by some like unknown rule that, anyway. So I'm not gonna, for me, this is, as I've said, this is a hill that I will die on. I will not have people say that certain words can never be uttered in any context, because it doesn't matter. The word does not have spiritual power. It is a clustering of letters together.
But more essentially, Frances, what are their credentials over yours or over my credentials? We don't even know who they are. These anonymous people that are deciding on the speech of everybody in the Western
anyway,
world.
This arbitrator, Alan Ponak, and I don't even like saying, so he's representing, he's the arbitrator. He's going to make this decision. So you got the union and you got the, the government, this poor woman who got totally railroaded. Whoever you are, this is just an absolute horror that this happened. And did the union appeal that decision? Like, I'm gonna investigate this. Anyway, so she was in a pre-Zoom meeting, and one of her colleagues was saying, what kind of music are you listening to nowadays? And she was saying, I don't like the music. I especially don't like rap music, because it's terrible to women. It's degrading to women. They call women bitches, and it's bad. It's terrible for Black people, because they call Black people niggers and in the music and so on. Anyway, because of her saying this in this pre-Zoom thing, she's fired. She has no history of any discipline or anything. It was like, she's just fired. and then they take it to arbitration, and the arbitrator decides that this is terrible what she did. So, but she shouldn't have been fired. So she's just going to be suspended for 10 days.
But Francis, I don't know anyone who needs to be convinced of this. Dave Chappelle and recently Chris Rock, their shows are among the most popular on Netflix
Yeah.
in recent years. And they use, I can't use it's going to make my case harder. I mean, I can't use the N word on even here because I don't want to give them more.
Mentioning it, Jim. You can't mention it.
And it's just so incredibly childish. So, but my question for you is, I know, look, when I got my PhD at the University of Toronto and I did well in the program, I was told that I wouldn't get a job as a white male. I know those who want to become arbitrators in recent years probably don't have an easy time if they're not only white male, but if they're not woke. So my question is, what are you going to do, or what am I going to do? Because I'm learning from you.
Yeah.
What are you going to do if your arbitrator is woke, is drinking the Kool-Aid?
You appeal. So you go to the court.
Okay. Just
yeah.
okay.
And then you hope that the courts are not woke. But the courts are very close to becoming woke. So things are crumbling. People have to take this and this is especially problematic in the law schools, because the law schools, and there's a group of lawyers in various provinces are battling on various fronts to stop the wokeism in the law schools. Glenn Blackett is one of them, and Lisa Bildy, Justice Center, and then there's Jim Heller and his in BC, his associate. So there's and Bruce Party at Queen's. So there's a bunch of different law professors and lawyers who are battling this out, and that's probably one of the most important front lines now, because if our legal system goes woke, it's over. Well, it's already we are heading down a fascist path, and the legal system, when the legal system becomes no longer equality oriented, which means each individual has equal protections under the law, you now have a fascist state.
Sure. There's so many lawyers in my life, in my family, and so forth, and they all have to take a sensitivity course.
I know.
Many hours, and they can't disagree with any of it.
I know.
It's horrible history.
Yeah.
It's compelled, and it's anyhow. It's just the whole thing is infatuous.
This is the problem. Like that should not be in there. You have to get those things out of there, and you have to get people to recognize this is the problem. Is that people are saying, "Oh, it doesn't do any harm. It's just showing respect." And it's no. This is a totalitarian maneuver that has to be beaten back. And this is what I want to get across to people who don't understand what wokeism is it really wokeism is a weapon, because it gets people to accept autocratic maneuvers when they wouldn't accept it otherwise, because they think that accepting this autocratic kind of process is helping those who are oppressed. Like that's how they get it in there, is that they use the oppressed, the plight of the oppressed, to get people off their guard and say, oh well, what's the harm and everything, and then whammo, now you've got this autocratic process that you're dealing with, and then that autocratic process is then going to be used to take everything else out. So people are saying, oh, it doesn't do any harm and it's a way of helping people and so on. You don't understand.
But I would argue, Francis, in response, I would argue that I have never met a lawyer, and I've talked to many on this issue, who doesn't agree with us. They're all frightened. They're all offended, but this is happening to them, and they can't do anything about it because this is their professional body, and they might fight in an election like the Stop in Ontario and so forth. So it's not convincing educated people. It's what
you haven't talked to a lot of lawyers, Jim.
Oh, I've talked to infinite number of lawyers.
Go talk to some lawyers in, who do these investigations.
Well, no, okay, but there's some they exist too. But the ones that I've thankfully talked to are certainly don't need you convinced of how dangerous.
But there's a lot who do need it, though, Jim. You're talking to the converted, right?
Yeah, okay, that's a good point, and you're speaking in part of the audience. But what I'd like to do is for those who are watching, who are already convinced, lawyers or others, who are already convinced that this is very dangerous for all professions and for society writ large, what's going to happen to you and to me, possibly? Because you're my inspiration, as you know. I'm not going to stop at anything. And
Yeah.
it's about principle. So
Yeah.
I think I could meet a woke arbitrator, and then I could
You will.
go to
You probably will.
judicial review and be refused because
Yeah.
that person's woke. And then I could go to court and meet a judge who's woke and who doesn't have the same
Yeah. Yeah.
characteristics that I do. And then I'm out of work. I have done nothing for 7 or 8 years.
Yeah. You're not going to be back. So you have to, first of all, embrace, you have to, so like the important part of this, which, and then this is something people have to decide. Your career is more likely than not going to be over in this sense.
Good point.
But you have to develop a new career of fighting to restore the institutions. That's going to be your new career. So
that is so beautifully said. That is beautifully said.
Yeah. So you have to kind of accept that.
I'm going to do that.
And some people don't want to do that, right? Some people will not fight it out. And it's maddening when you meet people like that, because it's like, why did you even start this ball rolling? So, you probably know of the case of Rick Mehta. So Rick is an example of this, which I don't even understand what's going on in his head. But he accepted $50,000 to settle his case. Like, why did you do that?
Frances, what you're saying is there's no price for you, because I don't think there is. There's no price for me. But guess who? But you know what? You've changed me, and then one other person changed me in this, and that was Rex Murphy, because they wanted to get rid of him at the National Post when he started delving into this woke madness. And he said one day, he wrote an article, and it looked like he was completely succumbing to it all, taking a knee, mea culpa, as my union at first told me to do. And he said at the end of his article, he said, "But everything I've said and written, I stand by every word and sentence, every letter, every punctuation mark, even the spaces in between." And that's us. And I think we're going to make a difference.
No, I think there's some things that I would do differently. And in fact, one of my famous, so one of the reasons why I got fired, for people who don't my case, if you haven't seen all the reasons, I wrote a piece in the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship newsletter. I think that was in September 2022, which has the whole case. But one of the reasons why I was fired was because of a tweet that satirized misgendering fatigue and the LGBTQ initialist. So that was one tweet that was found to violate 3 policies and 2 laws. I made a mistake with that tweet, which I would not do over again if I had to do it all over again. And what happened was I got trapped because of a troll by the name of Dr. Tony, who, what happened was that Jonathan Kay got emailed this invitation for a person who was going to be giving a workshop on white supremacy culture, its intrusion into the Mount Royal Faculty Association. Jonathan Kay saw this, and when he saw this workshop was being given, he looked up the person who was giving the workshop on the internet, and turned out it was also a person who was giving pronouns workshops and used they, them pronouns. And so Jonathan Kay referred to this person as a they, them. This incensed this troll, whose name was Dr. Tony, who was saying, how has Jonathan Kay got his hands on these communications? Why is he referring to this MRU colleague as a they, them? Why are they referring to this gender identity? This then led me to reply that I didn't know why Dr. Tony was upset for Jonathan Kay referring to this MRU colleague as a they, them. This then led the investigator to say that I was mocking this particular person, but it was never my intent to single out this individual. for like, I was just kind of trying to make a point about how this stupid cartoon about misgendering fatigue and the LGBTQ letters is, I didn't want it to be about this colleague. So if I were to do that over again, I wouldn't have said MRU colleague. I would have just said, I don't know why, something which would have been more generic about it. So there are things that I can admit that I would do differently, and I don't think, like that's what wasn't my intent to do that, and so on. And fine, people can admit that they made a mistake, and they should admit they make mistakes, but that doesn't mean that you're going to like they want me to accept responsibility and show remorse for my action. Like I'm not gonna apologize for something that I don't think I've done anything wrong, and people get trapped into doing this because they think it's going to save them. They think that if they apologize and if they just show enough, kind of contrition, then they'll go easy on them and so on. They're going to go harder on you because now you've admitted that you were wrong when you didn't think you were wrong, and now you're going to have to backpedal, and no one's going to believe you anymore at all. So people have got to figure out what they stand for and don't back down. Have courage of your convictions, continue to make the case, and if someone shows that you're wrong, say, I was wrong on that one, shouldn't have said that. Like that's how it goes here. But all this dishonesty and equivocation and all these sorts of things, like this is not getting us anywhere, and it's really harmful for the coalition building process when you have unprincipled people, because then no one can trust anyone anymore, and you cannot move forward. That's what kind of frustrates me about people like Wendy Mesley so much, is that I have continuously defended Wendy Mesley, and Wendy Mesley did nothing wrong. Wendy Mesley should never have had that happen to her, and she made this horrible groveling apology to the CBC, and now everyone who would have maybe wanted to support her is just going, well, she doesn't even believe what she's doing, so how can we stand behind her? So
You know what, Francis, a lot of my supporters don't really understand that what I'm doing. I'm uncategorical.
yeah,
I have done nothing wrong. And even if I had said something wrong, because I certainly have said many things wrong in my life, but
yeah,
I didn't in this instance. I spoke historical truth. But even if I hadn't, I shouldn't have been run out of my classroom and career for doing so.
yeah,
I am not bending at all. I
no,
am a rock in this. And I think you are. I'm not talking
yeah,
about peripheral issues. I'm talking about the fact that you're standing up to these totalitarian bullies. And continue to want to say to you, I am so very inspired. And I'm not after a settlement, particularly after listening
yeah,
to you.
yeah. Don't do it.
I'm after doing what's right. And what's
Yeah,
right is that I go to the end with this and I get a complete retraction. This isn't about me. I get a retraction from my employer saying that they're not going to ever do this again to anyone else. That we don't want speech police in our schools and our universities. That is not a characteristic of a democratic society. Teachers should feel free to have open debate and inquiry without fear of losing their jobs.
yeah. So this is to have clearly, if I were to make one criticism of you, Jim,
I need to learn.
uh, you
Let me
need
stronger.
to kind of encapsulate what your situation is in a more concise way. So you need to sort of select the information that is important for people to understand and put it out there in the front and center, because when people listen to you, or I just can, my own impression, we kind of get a bit lost in all the details that you're talking about. So in my SAFS piece, there's four, like it's very clear as to what happened in my case, and I don't think anyone who's really trying to pay attention here, all they have to do is just look at that article. So you probably want to kind of encapsulate what happened. You can't leave anything out, but you have to just bring it down to its essential points so that people know what it's all about.
Because I agree with you, and I need to train myself as they move toward arbitration
Yeah,
and ultimately court or whatever comes after that,
yeah.
because my case is strong enough in itself. I don't need to wage war against cancel culture, against
No, no, no.
absolutely everything, and of course I'm opposed to all of it.
Yeah,
I can stand on my case alone, and I need to make that very. I think
and I
those are
think that
wise
like
words.
singling in on the like there's some background that has to be understood, but then there's the actual comment that you made that resulted in this ridiculous kind of reaction of all the authorities, which is just like it's amazing that I like anyway, but it just like you said a few things there in your own case, which were very familiar. The investigations being one. So I've been through 5 investigations myself, and I recorded all of them. So they're all recorded. So people in the end, hopefully, we're all going to be able to have that as an archive that people can listen to. That's the one good thing about my case is that because of I saw 2 people pushed out at Mount Royal before me. I was ready for it to happen. Then I got everything recorded starting in 2019.
This is a rhetorical question because I know the answer. Is that a good use of taxpayer money to take someone like you who has got an important message because everyone else is too darn afraid
Yeah,
to say what you're saying? Is that a good use of taxpayer money? 5 investigations.
yeah,
And that's what they're doing to me. There's been 3 in my case. And I think as a teacher in a school, all the things we don't have textbooks, we don't have gym equipment, we don't have band anymore because there's no money for instruments, we
yeah,
don't have field trips, we have all sorts of things, and they're willing to spend all sorts of money for lawyers and arbitrators and other inquisitors
yeah,
to run me out simply because I'm wanting to teach honestly.
yeah. Well, it's an interesting question because, in a way, it is because, well, it is now because
Yeah, it's a good point.
I'm gonna pursue it to the end. So we will finally get an understanding of what the kind of parameters that we're operating within. So that's what happened in my case is that I everything that was done to me, I just turned around and did it to everyone else. And now we have to have some kind of universal standard that has got to be applied. But because the standards were so unequal, because they were, as you say, the investigations are to build the case that the employer wants. And what the employer wanted in my case was they first of all wanted me to submit and feel and be fearful. So that's kind of the goal is when you're investigated and you hear you're going to be investigated, you become fearful because you think your job is under threat, and that it is. That is what it is. But if you think, okay, well, I have done nothing wrong, and everything that's happened is just such a Kafka-esque kind of thing, it should go through all the processes to see what the outcome is and then fight the processes. So in the end, we're going to go through all the stages. And now, as I said, my new career is trying to, if I can't restore the institutions to their academic and kind of democratic character, then I will show the next generation how the system crumbled. So that's the next thing. So it's probably, I'm not going to be able to restore the institutions, but I'll be able to show the next generation how it's sort of like the people documenting things in Nazi Germany, right? Like, how did Nazi Germany become Nazi Germany? Is that there's a bunch of things that happened. And right now we're in the process of, documenting how did Canada become fascist? Well, this is kind of the things that happen. And in my case, and my actual history, because I've been in the I was in the government of the Northwest Territories in the 1990s and started my understanding of things there, and then moved to grad school and then moved to the university system. So between 1990, I guess 4 or 5, 1995 and 2025, which I guess is about 30 years, I can document what's happened with the situation, and more to come. So that people have to look at it more like that, not, am I going to win the arbitration or not? Like, probably not. You're probably not going to win the arbitration, but you got all the documentation in place that can then be used for the next level, and let a higher authority look at that. Are you going to win there? Well, you might, but you probably aren't. And so then you take it forward to the next level, and you hope that the institutions will remain at the higher levels intact. But even if they are not remaining intact, you've got how those institutions faltered, and then you can educate future generations about how things went wrong in the system.
I'm going to model your endurance.
Yes, and you have to be, you can't be impatient about it, and you certainly can't be wanting it to be over. People want it to be over. Quit now. Like, quit now, because like it's not going to be over. So if you don't have the stamina and the staying power for it, don't do us all a favor and quit, because people are going to be much more mad at you after they've tried to help you for years and years and years, and then you just back out and take a settlement or something, right? Like, I know many cases of this, and it's frustrating because you were there to fight, and now it was all a waste of time. It's not fair. It's not fair to people who have helped you either.
Yeah, and it's true. My son, as I said, my son got me on Twitter, and all of a sudden I had many thousands of followers. I think those followers are there because I am principled, because my cause is just. And so I'm going to be true to them. I'm going to be true to them.
And for the people who quit, I think they suffer terrible psychological problems because of it. Like, I'm not sure if you know the case of Scott Adams. Oh no, sorry, not Scott Adams. Last name is Adams. I get this wrong, because Scott Adams is the Dilbert character. Anyway, Adams was a professor in, I think it was North Carolina. Anyway, he was a fighter, and he was involved in all sorts of skirmishes with institutions. He got, when they denied him promotions and so on. At one point, he put out some tweets, and this, of course, was the tipping point in universities, was after the George Floyd episode, and things became very draconian at that point. Anyway, he put out a tweet that said, referring to the president of the university as a slave owner for not allowing, for having the lockdowns. He said, "Please, Massa, please set us free," or something. Anyway, this created a backlash, and he got some horrible things said to him and so on. And he said, "Okay, I'm done. I'm going to take the settlement." And he got I think a $500,000 settlement. Took the settlement, and I think it was like a couple of months later, killed himself.
Yeah, I have a friend named Paul LeMay who wrote a book on psychology. He says there's three types of people. There's the ones who fight, there's those that appease, and there are those who are defeated. And in this process, I've been all three.
Yeah.
And I think in the end, the two I can't beat, because you lose. I can't appease anymore anyway, because I'm out of the system.
Yeah.
And I can't be defeated. So I'm going to fight. And I have you.
Yeah. So until we get, people being disappeared, like, that's when it becomes really frightening. Like, do you want to lose your life over this? Like, that's scary. Like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to have a gun pointed at my head, then I don't know how I'm going to act in that. I hope I would do the principled thing, but, it's your life. But, like, you lose your job, like, this is terrible. It really is terrible. And I know some people really cannot afford to lose their jobs. But, it's not the end of the world. It's been a bit, it's not, you're wondering what's going to happen in the future, but, you say, well, like I'm not sure if you know the case of Denis Rancourt. He's a University of Ottawa professor who's a very principled guy. And he's been fighting since he got fired in 2008. And he's still fighting. And you mentioned you're being marched out of the university with the vice principals. I had a horrible situation, which was reminiscent of that, where I was forcibly confined in a classroom by an administrator and then chased to the university to my office and ended up calling 911 because I wanted the union to be there and they wouldn't allow me, they wouldn't get that involved. And then we did in Rancourt, they painted him as a dangerous person. They got a psychiatrist to write a report on him without the psychiatrist ever interviewing Rancourt. They got a student to spy on him, to label him as a dangerous person. Anyway, he's been fighting that since 2008 and just had a recent decision. I think it was this year, or maybe it was 2022. He got the decision. Anyway, he's appealing that. That got appealed. So he's not over yet. He's still going. Anyway, he said to me, I remember talking to him and I was going, because I'm a professor and I can write, but I don't have like a lot of options in terms of what I can do. And I'm going, well, I'm afraid because I don't know what else I can do besides being a professor. He says, if you can't do anything besides being a professor, then you're a useless, whatever. Like, you got a backbone and stand, so that kind of thing is like, hey, we're humans. We can do other things besides our one job, right? Like it's not the end of the world. Let's fight before we're being disappeared in the middle of the night. Like this is where it's going, and it's not going to stop. And it's only going to be organization and fighting back against it.
Yeah, you're giving me good counsel right now, and I want your viewers to know that this hasn't been easy.
No.
But it's getting easy.
Yeah.
Because I think I've found myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think others have found that in me, and together with you and others, I think we're going to make a difference, Frances.
We are making a difference already. But you just need to find the people who are principled and will fight. And if you can get enough of those people together, then we can beat back this totalitarianism. Anyway, well, Jim, on that note, we've gone a little bit over the 2-hour period. It's been, I think it's been pretty good. So I just do you have anything else that you think wasn't said that really needs to be said?
No, I'm really appreciative. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thanks very much, Jim. It was great having you on the Rational Space Disputations.
My honor.